Mrs. Ambridger's.
Is she with you?
When Callie walked into Portland's most exclusive tattoo parlor with a design she'd drawn herself, she expected ink on skin and nothing more. What she got instead was a public humiliation orchestrated by a man who had far more reason to fear her than she knew. The only person who stepped between her and the crowd was a quiet tattoo artist named Decker Cole, a man who already knew her name before she said it. As the video of her humiliation spread across the internet and the attacks against her escalated from words to something far more dangerous, Callie would have to choose between the armored identity she'd built over 8 years and the truth that had been waiting for her all along. And 300 men on motorcycles were about to remind an entire city that some debts don't stay buried. The sign above the door read Voss Inc. in brushed steel letters, understated in the way that only truly expensive things permit themselves to be. Callie stood on the sidewalk for exactly 4 seconds. She had learned to count her hesitations, to name them, to refuse them the dignity of lasting longer. And then she pushed through the glass door into air-conditioned silence and the faint industrial scent of antiseptic and black soap. The interior looked more like a gallery than a shop. White walls, track lighting angled precisely over framed prints of elaborate sleevework portraits so detailed they seemed to breathe, geometric pieces that looked like architecture rather than skin. The waiting area held 4 leather chairs that probably cost more each than Callie's monthly rent, and 3 people sat in them. A woman in a silk blouse scrolling her phone, a man in a blazer talking quietly into an earpiece, another woman with a particular posture of someone accustomed to being watched. Nobody looked up when Callie walked in. She didn't expect them to. She was wearing her usual dark jeans, a plain black tank top, her hair pulled back because she was practical about things that didn't matter. She had her appointment confirmation printed on her phone, and her design, a simple eagle wings, spread, clean lines, nothing elaborate, saved in her portfolio app. She had researched Voss Inc. for 3 weeks before booking, had read every review, had chosen this place specifically because the work was precise and the shop had a reputation for taking walk-in designs without trying to upsell the client into something more complicated. That last part she would later think had been the first mistake of a night full of them. Name? The woman at the front desk had the clip deficiency of someone used to screening. Callie, I have a 6 o'clock. The woman checked her tablet, nodded without warmth, and told her to wait. Callie sat in one of the leather chairs and looked at the prints on the wall and did not fidget. She had stopped fidgeting at 17 when she understood that stillness read as confidence even when it wasn't, and that confidence was the only currency she could always manufacture for herself. She was 26 now. She had a small graphic design studio 2 miles east of here, 3 loyal clients, enough to cover rent and not much beyond that, and a life she had assembled from scratch, with no help from anyone. She was proud of that. She was so proud of it that the pride had calcified somewhere in her chest, become structural, something she couldn't have removed even if she'd wanted to. She did not think about her father. She hadn't in a long time. Miss Callie. The voice came from the interior of the shop, deeper than she expected, with a slight roughness underneath the politeness, like gravel just below smooth water. She looked up. The man who stepped out from behind the partition was in his mid-40s, silver at his temples, wearing a pressed black shirt with the sleeves rolled precisely to the elbow. He was handsome in the expensive architectural way of men who have spent money to maintain it, and he smiled with all of his teeth. This, she would later understand, was Trent Voss. I'll be handling your appointment personally, he said, and something in the way he said, personally, made the word feel like a category rather than a courtesy. Come on back. She followed him through the partition and into the main studio space, which was larger than the front. Stated 6 stations, 3 of them occupied. The other artists at work in the particular focused silence of people doing something they were genuinely good at. Callie noticed a man at the far station, younger than the others, maybe 30, dark-haired, his head down over a piece he was working on. He didn't look up. She registered him the way she registered furniture: present, functional, irrelevant. Trent Voss gestured toward the primary chair, the largest station at the center of the room, and she sat. He settled onto his stool, and she opened her portfolio app and showed him the design. He looked at it for a long time without touching the phone. The smile had changed, not gone, but relocated, shifted into the eyes in a way that didn't improve it. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I drew it. I'm a graphic designer." He handed the phone back. "And you want this on your shoulder?" "Left shoulder, yeah. The wingspan is meant to be about 6 inches across, maybe a little more, if you think." "It's very simple," he said. She paused. "I like simple." "Of course you do." He set down the phone he'd been pretending to still look at and leaned back slightly, addressing the room rather than specifically her, his voice at a pitch that carried without effort. "We do a lot of simple work here. Simple is actually harder than it looks. Requires a certain kind of client who understands what they're getting. A beat. Not everyone does." The woman in the silk blouse, waiting at the nearest station for her own artist, looked up from her phone. "Your design is fine," Trent continued, and the word fine carried the same weight as acceptable for someone with your limitations. "But I think what we'll do is set you up at Station 6. My associate over there," he gestured toward the back of the room, toward the young man whose head was still down, "handles the simpler walk-in pieces. This station is usually reserved for our more established clients. Comfort issue, you understand. People who come to me regularly expect a certain atmosphere." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room full of people who have heard something and are deciding how much it costs them to react to it. Callie felt the heat move up from her sternum to her jaw. She knew this feeling. She had spent years learning to process it without showing it, to metabolize it cleanly and move forward. But there was something specific about this room. The leather chairs, the track lighting, the 3 strangers watching with the carefully arranged neutrality of people who had decided not to be inconvenienced by someone else's small injury, that made the heat feel less manageable than usual. "You're telling me to move to the back station," she said, "because of a comfort issue?" "I'm making a recommendation based on the nature of your project." His smile had achieved something like sympathy. Nothing personal. One of the clients laughed quietly, the kind of laugh someone makes when they're not certain they should be laughing, but feel peer pressure to do it anyway. The woman in the silk blouse went back to her phone. "Station 6, Trent said again, and gestured toward the back. And the gesture had the quality of a door being held open, in a way that meant out. "She stays here." The voice came from Station 6. The young man with dark hair had straightened up from his work, a tattoo machine still in his right hand, a paper towel in the other. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The room was quiet enough that normal speech carried perfectly. He set down the machine on his work tray, wiped his hands, and stood up. He was taller than Callie had clocked from across the room, long-limbed, with the particular economy of movement of someone who has learned that stillness can be louder than action. He had dark eyes, and a jaw that suggested he'd gotten hit in the face a few times, and hadn't found it worth remembering. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and black gloves, and he walked from his station toward the center of the room, without hurrying, without looking at Trent, looking instead, briefly, directly, at Callie. "Hey," he said to her, ignoring the rest of the room. "I'm Decker. You want your eagle on the left shoulder. Clean lines, 6 inches.
It was not a question.
I can do that right here." Trent's smile had not moved, but had become a different object entirely, the same shape, entirely different material. "Decker?" "Client's already seated," Decker said, still not looking at him. He pulled up Trent's stool and positioned himself in front of Callie, with the calm efficiency of someone completing a task that had already been decided. "You're going to want to drop the shoulder a little," he told her. "And yeah, I know you already know that, but I say it to everyone." Callie looked at him for a moment. She had been in the middle of deciding whether to stand up and leave. She was very close to it. She had her weight already shifted, her spine already straightening, and this stranger, with his matter-of-fact voice and his deliberate, quiet positioning of himself between her and the rest of the room, had disrupted the calculation entirely. "You called me Callie," she said, quietly, just for him. He met her eyes. Something moved in his, brief, controlled, quickly reassembled. "You told the desk your name when you came in," he said. "I was at my station. Sound carries." She held his gaze 1 second longer than necessary. Then she dropped her shoulder and let him work. Trent Voss stood for a moment in the center of his own studio, his smile having completed its transformation into something with edges, and then he turned and went back behind the partition without another word. The session lasted 90 minutes. Decker worked in the silence he seemed to have been born to, the machine steady and even, his hand confident without being rough. He adjusted twice, once asking her to tilt her chin, once asking if the pressure was okay, and otherwise didn't speak. Callie watched the needle in the mirror, angled at the station, and thought about nothing in particular, which was unusual for her. She was generally thinking about something. She didn't notice the client 2 stations over, filming on a phone, propped against a cup on the work tray. She wouldn't have known about it until the next morning, when her friend Mara texted her a link with the message, "This is you, right? Why is this in my feed already?" The video was 43 seconds. It started just after Trent had told her to move to Station 6, caught her face in profile, jaw tight, the particular stillness she used instead of expressions in moments like that. And the sound quality was decent enough to carry his words clearly. Comfort issue. You understand. Nothing personal. Then Decker standing up. Then the room. Then nothing more. Because the client filming had apparently decided they'd seen what they'd come to see. The title someone had attached when they reshared it. Guy at fancy tattoo shop humiliates woman for her simple design. Then watch what the artist does. By midnight, it had 200,000 views. By the time Callie went to sleep, the number had stopped mattering because she had turned off her phone. She sat on the edge of her bed in her quiet apartment and held the bandage on her left shoulder carefully and looked at the wall and thought about a great many things that she had spent 8 years training herself not to think about. She thought about her father, Hank Mercer, who had been many things: complicated, large-spirited, dangerous in the way of people who love you completely and exist on the wrong side of every polite line, and who had been missing for 8 years after an accident on a mountain road in the dark. She thought about the name she had buried when she reinvented herself. She thought about a tattoo shop she had researched for 3 weeks and chosen because the reviews said they treated clients with precision and professionalism. She thought about a man who had called her Callie before she told him her name. She decided she was imagining things. She was good at making decisions. She turned the phone back on, looked at the view count. 412,000. Turned the phone back off and made herself go to sleep. The eagle on her shoulder was the cleanest thing she'd ever had on her skin. She would not give Decker Cole credit for that yet, but the knowledge was there, tucked in quietly, the way that inconvenient facts tend to install themselves. The morning came in through the east-facing window, the way Portland mornings did, in October gray gold, non-committal, the sun present in theory only. Callie made coffee the same way she always did, black, no sugar, the grounds measured exactly right, because imprecision in small things annoyed her, and she had no larger things to be precise about. Yet, at 6:45 in the morning, she stood at her kitchen counter and drank half of it before she turned her phone back on. The video had 1.3 million views. She put the phone face down on the counter and finished her coffee. She showered carefully around the bandage, dressed in what she privately thought of as her armor: dark slim trousers, a fitted gray turtleneck that covered the shoulder dressing without making a point of it, boots that added 2 inches she didn't need but liked, and she walked the 12 minutes to her studio. Mercer Design. Except, of course, the door said Callaway Design, because the last name she used professionally was her mother's maiden name, which she had taken at 18, and which nobody questioned, because nobody had a reason to. The studio was a narrow storefront between a Vietnamese sandwich shop and an alterations place, and it smelled like printer toner and the lavender plant she kept on the windowsill because one of her clients had given it to her, and she found she couldn't throw away things that had been given with genuine kindness. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, sat at her desk, and opened her laptop to begin the invoicing she'd been putting off. Her email had 47 new messages. 39 of them were from people who had seen the video. The messages divided roughly into thirds: people expressing support, people expressing a more complicated admixture of support and unsolicited advice, and people, this third was small but loud, expressing the opinion that she had done something wrong by being in that chair to begin with. She did not read the third category twice. She flagged 4 of the support messages that she thought deserved replies, marked the rest as read, and opened her invoicing spreadsheet. Her phone buzzed. Mara, via text. Trent Voss just responded to the video on his Instagram, said it was taken out of context. His comment section is not going well for him. Then, 30 seconds later, also someone is going around saying you pulled a Karen, and he was just professionally advising you. It's small, but it's loud. Thought you should know. Callie typed back, noted, I'm fine. Mara responded with a string of emojis that communicated skepticism without requiring punctuation. The invoicing took until 10. She was halfway through an email to her longest-running client about a logo refresh when the door opened and a man she had never seen walked in, mid-30s, beard, a Carhartt jacket, and the particular straight-back Ed way of standing that suggested outdoors work rather than office work. He looked at the space, looked at her, and said, without preamble, "You're the designer from the video." "I'm a designer," Callie said. "Can I help you?" He seemed to decide something. Just wanted to say what happened was messed up. He put a business card on her desk, a landscaping company out in Gresham. "My wife does graphic work for our invoices, if you do that kind of thing." "I do that kind of thing," Callie said. "Good." He nodded and left. She looked at the business card for a moment. Then she put it in her lead pile, which was a physical folder in her top drawer, and went back to the email. At 11:45, she stepped outside to get lunch from the sandwich shop next door. The owner, Mrs. Gwynn, was a compact woman in her 60s who communicated primarily through the speed and precision with which she made sandwiches which Callie had long ago learned to read as a second language. Today, Mrs. Nguyen made Callie's sandwich, handed it over, and then reached under the counter and produced a container of the homemade pickled daikon she normally kept back for family. "I saw," Mrs. Nguyen said simply. Callie took the daikon. "Thank you." She was back at her desk with the sandwich half-eaten when the email from her client Marcus Chen came in. Marcus ran a mid-sized architecture firm and was responsible for roughly 30% of Callie's annual income. His emails were usually brief and precise. This one was 5 lines longer than usual and ended with, "I want you to know this doesn't affect our working relationship in any way. If anything, I was impressed by your composure in the video." She read it twice, then she wrote back, "Thank you, Marcus. The Hendricks project revisions are on track for Thursday." By 2 in the afternoon, she had almost convinced herself that the day was going to be manageable. Then her phone showed a new notification. Not a text, not an email, but a tagged mention in a post on a platform she barely used. She clicked through. The post was from an account with no profile photo and 3 days of history. It contained 2 images, both of Callie taken outside. One appeared to be from this morning near her building. The other was older, maybe a week, outside a coffee shop she went to on Tuesdays. The caption read, "For those defending this woman might want to know who her daddy is. #Voss Inc. #Portland." There was no further information in the post, just the photographs and that single line. Callie set her phone flat on the desk. She breathed in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts, which was a technique she'd learned in a therapy session she'd attended exactly once at 22, and found useful despite her skepticism about the rest of it. Then she picked up her phone and screenshotted the post and saved it to a folder she created in that moment and labeled Document. She was good at documentation. She had learned young that memory was unreliable in moments of high emotion, that records mattered more than feelings, that the discipline of evidence was the only thing that survived when everything else was messy. She sent a screenshot to Mara with the message, "Someone knows who my father is. They haven't said what yet. Saving everything." Mara responded in under a minute, "Callie, that's a threat. You need to tell someone." Callie put her phone in her desk drawer and went back to the Hendricks project revisions. She was going to finish them before Thursday, regardless of what was happening around the edges of her life, because she had made a commitment, and she honored commitments. That was also something she had learned young, that the small disciplines were the ones that held the structure of a life together when the larger things tried to shake it apart. She did not at this point think about calling anyone. She did not have people to call. She had Mara, who was her closest friend, and a person of tremendous warmth and approximately 0 ability to be useful in a crisis. She had her clients who paid her, and who had, today, been unexpectedly decent about the situation. She had an apartment and a studio, and a name that was half real, and an eagle tattoo that was healing cleanly under a bandage on her left shoulder. She had built this. She would defend it herself. She did not yet know that the decision had already been made for her, not by anyone who meant her harm, but by a group of men in a warehouse on the east side of the city, who had watched the same video she'd been trying not to think about, and who had recognized in the still proud line of her profile, in the way she had not flinched, something they had been looking for a very long time. 3 days passed with the particular quality of days that are outwardly calm and inwardly full of motion, the way a river looks smooth from a bridge while the current does its work below. Callie went to her studio. She finished the Hendricks revisions. She replied to the landscaping man's wife, whose name was Donna, and scheduled a call. She did not go back to look at the video, but she was aware of it, the way you're aware of a bruise, not always in pain, but conscious of the geography of the damage. On the fourth day, Decker Cole walked into her studio. She looked up from her screen, and the recognition was immediate and not entirely comfortable. He was wearing the same kind of gray t-shirt, or a different one of the same kind, and a canvas jacket over it, and he was carrying 2 coffees in a cardboard tray, one of which he set on the corner of her desk without being invited. "Black," he said. "No sugar." She looked at the cup. "Did you follow me here?" "No." He sat in the client chair across her desk, as if he'd been invited to do that either. "Your studio name is on your email signature. I found your email in the appointment system." "That's a privacy violation." "Technically, it's a terms of service gray area." He didn't appear troubled by this. "How's the shoulder?" She didn't touch the shoulder. "Fine. Why are you here?" "Because Trent Voss filed a complaint with the Portland Business Association yesterday, citing your studio by name," Decker said, "claiming you staged the video to damage his business and that you're operating a competing service without proper licensing. Both claims are false, in case that wasn't obvious. But a complaint goes on record even when it's false, and he knows that, which is why he filed it." Callie was quiet for a moment. She had not known about the complaint. She pulled up the Business Association portal on her second screen, she had a login for it, and found the filing in under 2 minutes. She read it carefully. It was neatly written and specific in its accusations, and entirely fabricated. "He moves fast," she said. "He does." Decker picked up his coffee. He's also had someone respond to about 40 comments on the video's largest reshare, framing you as the aggressor. The accounts are fake, but they're well made, and they've been at it long enough that some of the comments are getting traction. "Are you monitoring his social media?" "I'm aware of what's happening." She looked at him directly. He had the quality she'd noticed in the studio. Not stillness exactly, more like considered patience, the kind that doesn't cost him anything. It made her feel obscurely like she was being outmaneuvered in a conversation she didn't know she was having. "Decker," she said, "why are you aware of what's happening to me?" He held her gaze. Something moved in his expression, the same brief, contained thing she'd seen when she asked him how he knew her name, and then it was gone. "Because what Trent did wasn't impulsive," he said. "He's not a man who does impulsive things. He set you up at that station and ran that performance in front of those clients because he wanted a specific result, which was to humiliate you publicly enough that anything you said about him afterward could be framed as retaliation." A beat. "It would have worked better if I hadn't stepped in. He wasn't expecting that." Callie turned this over in her mind. It fit. It fit in the particular way that pieces fit when you already half know the shape of them, when the truth is something you've been walking around the edge of rather than looking at directly. Why would he care enough about me to orchestrate something that elaborate? She asked. "I'm nobody. I have 3 clients and a studio the size of a parking space." Decker was quiet for a long beat. "He's the kind of man who likes to establish leverage before he needs it," he said finally. "Doesn't always need a specific reason, just needs to know he can." It was not a satisfying answer, and she could tell he knew it wasn't, and she could tell he had given it anyway, which meant there was a more satisfying answer he wasn't giving her. She filed that away. "What do you recommend I do about the complaint?" she asked, because that was the concrete problem in front of her, and she was good at concrete problems. "File a counterstatement today. Include the original appointment confirmation, the payment record, and a time-stamped screenshot of his Instagram response to the video where he called it context. The business association is not on Trent's side here. They're just procedurally required to log complaints. A counterstatement with documentation closes it quickly. She had already been opening the counterstatement form in a separate tab. Is there anything in the filing that requires legal response? No, he didn't go that far. A pause. This time. The "this time" sat in the air between them. Decker, she said again, and this time she meant it differently. Not as an address, but as a kind of examination. His name as a question. You intervened in the studio. You showed up here. You know about the business association filing before I did. You know I take my coffee black. She let that last one land. I'd like an honest answer about why. He was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, I'm going to be honest with you about as much as I can right now, and I'll tell you clearly when I've hit the limit of what I can say. That's a strange thing for a person to say. I know. Say it anyway. He set his coffee down. I've been watching out for you for about 6 weeks, he said. Not in a way you would have noticed. I was careful about that. I work at Voss, Inc., which is not something I enjoy, but it put me in a position to know if Trent was going to make a move on you, which I suspected he would eventually. I didn't expect it to happen at that appointment. When it did, the only thing I could do that was immediate was what I did. He paused. The name thing, you're right, sound doesn't carry that well from the front desk. I already knew your name before you came in. Callie felt the words arrive and settle. She was very still. You already knew my name? Yes. And you didn't mention that? No. And you're not going to tell me how? Not yet. She breathed in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. Okay, she said, and her voice was extremely level. Here's what I know. You're not a threat to me, or you would have been one already, and you've had 6 weeks of opportunity. You're connected to something I don't fully understand yet. Trent Voss has a specific, non-random reason to want to damage my credibility, and you know what it is. And you're not telling me. She looked at him steadily. How close am I? Close, he said. His voice had something in it, not admiration exactly, but a quality adjacent to it. The same way warmth can live just next to surprise. I'm going to file this counter statement, she said. And I'm going to document everything the social media posts, the complaint, any contact Trent Voss makes. And I'm going to figure out the rest of it myself. I know, he said. And then quietly, I'm not asking you not to. I'm around. If you need something specific. She looked at him for another moment. He had a scar through his left eyebrow, hairline thin, old. He was sitting in her client chair with a coffee he'd brought her, and no apparent agenda beyond what he'd said. And she was aware that people without agendas generally did not turn up in your studio 6 weeks into a surveillance operation. Thank you for the coffee, she said, which was the most honest thing she could offer him right now. He picked up his cup, stood, and said, The needlework on the shoulder should be fully healed in another 4 days. Don't pick at the edges. I know how healing works. I know you do. He said it without irony. Then he was gone. Callie sat for a moment in the empty studio and felt the weight of the conversation arrange itself into something she could categorize. The category she landed on was person I don't yet understand, operating from motivations I can't fully access, who has so far done nothing but help. That was not a comfortable category. It didn't have clean edges. She filed the counter statement. She documented the social media posts in the document folder. She called Mara and told her approximately 60% of what had happened. The 60% that didn't require explaining a surveillance operation she didn't yet have the context to explain. Then, at 4 in the afternoon, she opened a new browser tab and searched Trent Voss, Portland Business History. She had done this before when she was first choosing a tattoo parlor, had run a basic background check, the way she ran basic background checks on all vendors. What she had found then was unremarkable. Voss Inc. established 12 years ago, decent BBB rating, no major legal flags. Now she dug deeper. Court records, property filings, business registrations. She had a good eye for data structures. It was one of the things that made her an effective graphic designer. The ability to see patterns in information. She found things that were interesting. Trent Voss had incorporated 3 separate LLCs in the 7 years prior to Voss Inc. 2 had dissolved. The third had transferred its assets to a company called RM Holdings. She searched RM Holdings and found it attached to a real estate portfolio in the Pacific Northwest and several commercial properties in eastern Oregon. She searched the physical addresses. She searched the registration history. She stopped on one address. It was a warehouse property in Bend, Oregon, transferred to RM Holdings 8 years ago. The previous owner was listed as a company called Mercer Northwest LLC. She read the name 3 times. Her coffee was cold beside her keyboard. The lavender plant on the windowsill moved slightly in the air from the heating vent. She did not react externally. She was very practiced at not reacting externally. But something in the architecture of the past 8 years shifted, rearranged, settled into a shape she had not expected and could not yet fully read. She took a screenshot. She saved it to the document folder. She created a subfolder and labeled it Mercer and moved the screenshot into it. Then she sat very still for a long time and thought about her father and the accident and the mountain road in the dark, and about a man who had filed a business complaint against her 4 days after a public humiliation, and about the specific timing of all of it, and about the word leverage and why someone would want it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring. It rang again. Then a text from the same number, a string of digits, no message, no context. She stared at them. Then she typed them into her mapping app. A location in outer southeast Portland came up, a diner on Division Street. Below the coordinates was a second text from the same number. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. Come alone. She looked at the message for a long time. Then she saved the number, saved the screenshot, added it to the Mercer folder, and went back to the Hendricks materials, because she had a Thursday deadline, and she was going to meet it. The meeting was tomorrow. She would decide tonight whether to go. She would go. She worked until 7, which was later than she usually stayed, and then she walked home the long way through Ladd's Addition, the neighborhood with the rose gardens laid out in wheel-spoke patterns that she had loved when she first moved here, and still loved, in the particular way of things that don't require you to think about them. The roses were past their October peak papery at the edges, browning at the tips, but the structure was still there, the wheel still visible, and she liked things whose structure held, even when the surface details were diminished. She was halfway through the garden when she became aware that she was being followed, not closely. Probably 40 feet back, moving at her pace rather than closing the gap, which meant observation rather than approach. She kept walking and counted her steps, and in the reflection of the gate at the garden's eastern exit, she got a partial view. A man, heavy-set, dark jacket, hands in pockets. He was looking at his phone. He was doing a decent job of appearing incidental. She changed direction, went south instead of west, and he adjusted. She confirmed it twice more, and then she walked into a coffee shop on Hawthorne that she didn't normally frequent and sat at a table visible from the street and ordered a tea she didn't want and sent Mara a text. "If I don't text you good morning tomorrow by 8, call the police." She added the address of the coffee shop. "Mara, what is happening, Callie?" "Probably nothing. Documenting." She waited 20 minutes. The man in the dark jacket did not come into the coffee shop. When she left, she went directly home via the most populated streets, and she did not see him again. She couldn't prove it was connected to anything. She documented it anyway. Time, location, description, what he'd been wearing. Added it to the document folder. In her apartment, she ate a reheated bowl of rice and black beans, and thought about what it meant to be followed, and what it meant that someone had found 2 photographs of her in 2 different locations in the past week, and what it meant that Trent Voss's business history intersected with the word Mercer in an Oregon property record 8 years old. She thought about her father. Hank Mercer had been, among other things, a man who understood that information was power, who kept records, who documented everything, who said to her once when she was about 14, "The other guy's always going to be louder than you, Cal. You make sure you're smarter." She had thought at the time that he was talking about writing or about the politics of running a chapter. She understood later that he was talking about everything. She opened her laptop and went back to the property records and spent 2 hours following the transfer chain from Mercer Northwest LLC through to RM Holdings and then to 3 commercial properties in Portland and 1 in Bend. She found a signature on one of the transfer documents, a notarized signature, faint but legible, that was not Trent Voss's. It was a name she didn't recognize. R. McCready. She searched R. McCready and Portland and Oregon and came up with a notary who had been suspended from practice 7 years ago for document irregularities. A suspended notary, a transferred property, a timing that matched precisely the year her father had disappeared. She added R. McCready to the Mercer folder and made herself go to bed. She slept badly and woke at 5:45 and lay in the dark with the particular alertness of someone who has been sleeping light. She thought about the diner on Division Street. She thought about unknown numbers and coordinates. She thought about Decker Cole sitting in her client chair and saying, "Not yet," when she asked him to tell her how he knew her name, and the way his voice had been not evasive exactly, more like a man holding a door shut that he believed was protecting something, uncertain whether what was on the other side of it was better or worse than the door itself. She got up and made coffee and dressed in the dark, putting on the boots again. The armor was becoming a habit. She supposed that was fine. She had worn heavier things. She was out the door by 6:30, walking toward Division Street, and she did not check behind her, because she had decided the night before that if she was going to be followed, she was going to be followed regardless, and she might as well walk with her head up. The diner was an old one-booth seating, a counter with spinning stools, vinyl floor the color of old honey. It smelled like coffee and hash browns, and the particular warmth of a kitchen that starts work at 5. She was the second customer. The first was already in the back booth, a man she had not seen in 8 years, but recognized immediately in the way you recognize geography, bone deep, automatic, independent of time. He was 60, approximately, though he looked older today than she remembered him. Heavy in the shoulders, grayer at the temples than he used to be, with the hands of a man who has spent decades working outdoors. He had a cup of coffee in front of him and he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has prepared for many possible versions of a moment, and is not certain now that it's here which version this is. His name was Ruiz. He had been her father's oldest friend, and her father's sergeant-at-arms, which meant he had been in the years of her childhood when she understood such things only as texture rather than structure, one of the few people in the world who made her father move differently when they were in the same room, not smaller, but more carefully. She sat down across from him. He said, "You look like him." "I know," she said, "around the eyes especially." "I know." She put both hands on the table. "Ruiz, why am I here?" He reached into his jacket slowly, watching her face, the particular carefulness of a man who has learned not to make sudden movements in conversations where the other person might bolt, and placed something on the table. A photograph, printed on regular copy paper, slightly faded from the printing. She looked at it without touching it. She was 8 years old in the photograph. She was sitting on the tank of a motorcycle in a parking lot she did not recognize, squinting against sunlight, her hair in 2 uneven braids, her shoes untied, because at 8 she had not cared about tied shoes. Her father was standing next to the bike, one hand on the handlebars, not looking at the camera. He was looking at her. His expression was the one she thought about when she let herself think about him at all. The specific way his face changed when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Something careful and fierce and enormous living in it. She did not cry. She put the photograph down. "He knows you're here," Ruiz said. "In Portland. He's known for a while." The diner was quiet around them. The counterman was refilling the coffee urn. "He's alive," she said. It was not a question. She had not let herself ask the question in 8 years, because asking questions you can't answer is a specific kind of damage, and she had learned to protect herself from it. But something in Ruiz's presence in the photograph, and the way he'd said, "You look like him," had rearranged the furniture of the assumption she'd been living with. "He's alive," Ruiz confirmed. His voice was careful. It's been complicated, Callie. I'm not going to pretend it's simple. There are things that happened that night on that road that you need to know, and there are reasons why you haven't been told yet. And I'll tell you both. But the most important thing right now is that someone has started to move against you, and we need to talk about that. "Trent Voss," she said. Ruiz looked at her with an expression that said he was recalibrating something. "You know the name?" "I found his name in a property transfer connected to my father's business, LLC." She watched his face. "That's what the tattoo thing was about, wasn't it? He wasn't just being a snob. He recognized me." "We think so," Ruiz said. "We're not certain, but the timing..." "The timing is not a coincidence." She picked up her coffee. "Who is the we in that sentence?" He looked at her steadily. "You know who we are." She did. She had always known, even when she was trying not to. The we was the chapter. The we was 300 men and a history and a name she'd spent 8 years not using. "What does the chapter want from me?" she asked. "To help protect you," Ruiz said, "and to let your father know you're okay." A pause. "He asks about you. He's asked every week for 8 years. Something moved in Callie's chest. Something large and badly sealed, like a door in wind. She held it shut. "I don't need protection," she said, and her voice was perfectly steady. "I know you believe that," Ruiz said gently, with the specific gentleness of a man who has seen that kind of belief before, and knows what it costs. I'm asking you to let us help anyway. I need time to think, she said. She left $30 on the table, enough to cover both coffees and the hash browns Ruiz hadn't ordered yet, but would, and she went back out into the October morning and walked home and sat down at her desk and opened the Mercer folder and looked at what she had, which was the beginning of something she had not yet decided how to finish. At noon, she got a notification on her studio's Google listing, a 1-star review from an account she didn't recognize, overpriced work from someone who can't handle professional feedback, staged drama for views, avoid. By the time she reported it, 2 more had appeared. The fake reviews disappeared within 24 hours. Google's systems flagged them as policy violations. But in the hours between their appearance and their removal, they had generated enough comments and reshares on a local community board that the damage existed independently of the original posts. This was, Callie understood the point. You did not need the fire to last. You only needed the smoke. She documented everything. She ate her lunches at her desk. She stayed later than she should have and came in earlier than she needed to, because the studio was the thing she had built, and she was not going to watch it dissolve from the outside while she sat at home eating black beans and trying to feel okay about things. Decker called on Wednesday morning. She picked up on the second ring. "The social media campaign against you has picked up a new account," he said without preamble. "Whoever's running it has gotten more sophisticated. They're targeting your client reviews, not just the general video thread." "I noticed," she said. A pause. "Are you sleeping?" "Adequately." "That's not the same as yes." "Decker." She kept her voice level. "I appreciate the monitoring. I do. But I need you to understand that what I find most useful is information, not concern. Can you tell me specifically which platforms and which accounts?" He told her. She wrote it down. She asked 2 follow-up questions about posting patterns, and he answered them correctly, which told her he was actually watching the data rather than summarizing someone else's summary. She found this unexpectedly reassuring. "The meeting with Ruiz," she said, "was that you?" A silence of a different quality than the others. "He reached out to you on his own," Decker said. "I knew he was going to." "Did you know he was going to tell me my father is alive?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "Yes," he said. "Did you know before that meeting that my father is alive?" "Yes." She let that sit between them on the phone line. She did not ask how long. She wasn't ready to ask how long. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for the platform information. I'll document and report." "Callie, I'll be in touch if I need something," she said, and ended the call. She sat very still for approximately 2 minutes. Then she went back to work. She did not go back to the diner. She had told Ruiz she needed time, and she did. And time was what she was taking, carefully, methodically, in the way she took all things that had the potential to undo her. She was building towards something. She could feel the shape of it, the way you feel the shape of a room before the lights come on. The Thursday deadline arrived, and she delivered the Hendrix materials on time. And Marcus Chen sent back a response within 3 hours that said only, "Perfect, thank you." And she felt a small, solid satisfaction that had nothing to do with anything else happening in her life, which was exactly the kind of satisfaction she trusted. On Friday afternoon, she was locking the studio at 6 when she heard the sound of breaking glass from inside. She had been outside, door locked, key still in her hand when it happened, which meant she had a clear second of decision, go in or call. She called. Portland non-emergency line reported a possible break-in, gave the address. stayed outside. She called Mara next and told her not to come, just to know. Then she stood on the sidewalk and waited, because she was practical, and going in alone was not practical. The police arrived in 11 minutes. What they found inside was not a robbery. Nothing taken, nothing of value touched. What had been done was targeted. Her 2 large format monitors, both shattered. Her portfolio boards pulled from the wall and snapped. The lavender plant from the windowsill, which felt obscurely like the most personal part, the pot broken on the floor, and the dirt spread out, and the small purple plant lying on its side like a question mark. The officer who took her statement was efficient and sympathetic in the practiced way of someone who is efficient and sympathetic many times a day. She gave him everything she had in the document folder. The fake reviews, the social media posts, the photographs of her taken from a distance, the note about being followed, printed off her laptop on the police station printer, organized by date, labeled clearly. He looked at the organized packet, and then at her, and said, "You prepared this in advance." "I had a feeling," she said. He took the packet. He told her they'd review it. He gave her a case number. She thanked him, and he left. And she stood in her destroyed studio and looked at the lavender on the floor and felt the familiar heat moving up from her sternum. And this time she let it go somewhere not outward, but downward, into the soles of her feet, into the floor, into the earth below the floor. A trick she'd learned at 20, when she understood that some things needed to go somewhere before you could keep moving. She swept up the soil and repotted the lavender in a coffee mug, because she didn't have another pot. It listed slightly to the left in the mug, but it was upright, and that was what mattered. She was setting it back on the windowsill when the door opened. Decker was there. He looked at the studio, at the broken monitors, the pulled boards, the sweep marks on the floor where she'd collected the larger pieces of glass, and then at her. And his face did something she hadn't seen it do before. It went briefly but completely still, the way a face goes still when the brain has registered something and is processing faster than expression can keep up with. "How long ago?" he said. "Officers left 40 minutes ago." He came in. He walked the perimeter of the space, slowly, looking at the specific things that had been targeted. "The boards," he said. "Not the computer, not your external drives. No. The boards have your client work on them, current projects visible from outside if someone looked through the window." Yes. She had thought about this. Someone wanted to demonstrate that they knew what was worth damaging. More than that. He turned to face her. He was perhaps 6 feet away. They wanted you to feel watched, not just targeted, observed. That's a specific kind of message. "I know what kind of message it is," she said, and her voice was not level this time. Not completely. There was something in it, something with edges. And she didn't suppress it because she was tired, and because she was alone in her destroyed studio with a man she didn't entirely trust, and a case number on a piece of paper, and a lavender plant in a coffee mug. "Decker, tell me what you know, all of it, or as close to all of it as you can get. Don't give me the 'not yet' answer tonight." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the lavender in the mug. "Trent Voss was your father's business partner," he said. 8 years ago they had a deal that went wrong, or that Trent made go wrong. The road accident wasn't an accident. Your father's bike was run off the road. The intention was that he wouldn't survive it. He said this plainly, without drama, the way you say things that are hard when you respect the person you're saying them to enough not to soften them. He survived because Ruiz found him before anyone else could go back and confirm. The chapter got him out. They'd been protecting him since, not from the world, but from Trent specifically, until they had enough to bring Trent down through legitimate means. If Hank surfaces before they have the evidence locked in, Trent has resources to make the counter-narrative work. He's been building it for 8 years. Callie listened to all of this and did not speak. She was looking at a point past his shoulder, somewhere in the middle of the studio, where there was nothing specific to look at. "Why didn't the chapter contact me sooner?" she asked. "They tried. Twice. You had moved both times, and you hadn't left contact information." She thought about that. She thought about how deliberately she had moved, how carefully she had covered the trail. She had been so proud of the clean break. She had built an entire life around the dignity of the clean break. "And you," she said, "where do you fit in this?" He looked at her directly. "I've been with the Portland chapter for 3 years. When it became clear Trent was circling the area and that your business had appeared on a local design vendor list that his company used, the president asked me to take the position at Voss Inc., to watch, to be in a position to intervene if he moved against you." A pause. "I was supposed to make contact gradually, ease into it, not spook you into moving again. And then he humiliated me in front of a room full of people." "And then he did that. And the gradual approach went out the window." She was quiet for a moment. "You've been watching him for 3 years, and you don't have enough yet?" "We have a lot. We're missing the key link, the notary, R. McCready. We can prove the transfer was fraudulent, but we need McCready's testimony to make the criminal case, not just the civil." "He's been difficult to locate." Callie looked at him. "I found his name in the public records 2 days ago," she said. "It took me about 40 minutes. Something crossed Decker's face. "Where?" "The notarized document on the Bend property transfer. His license suspension was public record. I have his former business address, his bar registration number, and a last known address in Astoria from a 2019 court filing, where he was named as a witness, not a party." Decker was quiet for a long moment. "We've been looking in Portland," he said. "Astoria," she said. "You're welcome." He looked at her and she looked at him, and between them was the particular complex awareness of 2 people who have been operating on the same problem from different directions and have just discovered that the other person's map has details theirs is missing. "I'd like to be involved in this," she said. "I know. Not as the protected party, as a participant." "I know that too." He paused. "Callie, I need to tell you. The chapter isn't going to back off protecting you, regardless of what you decide. You're Hank Mercer's daughter. That's not negotiable for them." "And what is it for you?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the lavender in the coffee mug again, then back at her. "I haven't figured that out yet," he said. And for the first time since she'd met him, she had the distinct impression he was being completely unstrategic, that the answer was real rather than managed. She nodded once. "I'm not ready to talk to my father yet. I need more time." "Okay." "But I want everything you have on Trent Voss, the full file." "I can do that." "And I want to know about R. McCready before you move on him." "I have a right to be at the table on this." "Agreed," he said. She turned back to her studio, the monitors, the boards, the mess of it. "I'm going to need help cleaning this up," she said. Not as a request exactly, more as a statement of fact offered to whoever happened to be present. "I know," Decker said, and went to find the broom. They worked in a silence that was different from the silence in the tattoo studio, less careful, more inhabited, The kind of silence that forms between people who have said difficult things and have more difficult things ahead, and are, in the interim, just trying to get a broken room into a less broken state. He swept while she gathered glass. She righted the overturned shelf while he moved the damaged boards to the back corner. They didn't speak much, and when they did, it was practical. Is that straight? Do you have a trash bag? Where do you want these? At 8:30, she said she was done for the night. He said, okay. He left first. She locked up. She stood on the sidewalk in the dark and felt the weight of the evening settle. Not heavily, not the way she'd expected, but with a kind of ballast that was different from the familiar loneliness she usually carried, like something had been added rather than taken. She found in the back of her desk drawer the next morning, when she came in to assess the damage in daylight, a folder she had never seen before. Cream-colored, unmarked. Inside it were 12 pages of documents, organized, dated, cross-referenced, and on top of them, a post-it note, in handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. Her father's, still unmistakably his, as direct and unsparing as he had always been in everything. It said, I'm sorry it took this long. We'll talk when you're ready. I've been proud of you the whole time. She sat down on the floor of her studio, the folder in her lap, and let the enormous, badly sealed door finally open just a little, just enough for what needed to come through. Then she put the folder in the Mercer folder, locked it in her desk, stood up, made herself a cup of coffee, and opened her laptop to start the day. She had work to do. The full file that Decker brought her 2 days later was a legal-size accordion folder, worn at the edges, with a tab system she could tell had been developed by someone who thought the way she did about information chronologically on the primary axis, then cross-referenced by subject. She went through it at her kitchen table on Sunday morning, with both hands free and coffee going cold beside her, and gave it the same focused attention she gave to complex design briefs, reading once for the structure, then again for the gaps. The structure of what Trent Voss had done was clear, detailed, and devastating in the flat way that calculated betrayal tends to be, once you can see the whole of it. 8 years ago, Hank Mercer and Trent Voss had been partners in a real estate venture, commercial properties in Eastern Oregon. A partnership that had grown organically from a business connection Hank had made through a legitimate contact. The chapter's activities and Hank's personal business were, as Callie knew from childhood, carefully separated. Hank had been meticulous about that, meticulous in the way of a man who understood that some things needed to be protected from other things. Trent had used that separation against him. It structured the partnership paperwork through intermediaries, used the notary McCready to execute transfers before they were properly authorized. And when the time came to execute his plan, he'd had Hank's name on documents that looked, on their face, like an orderly business separation. The road accident, the thing that was supposed to be permanent, had been arranged through a third party that the file identified by initials only, D.F. Unknown. The chapter had spent 3 years narrowing down the candidate pool and had not yet landed on a certain identification. The gaps were fewer than she expected, but precisely located. The McCready testimony was the critical one. He was the linchpin between the fraudulent transfers and Trent's direct involvement. Without him, you had a civil case about business fraud and a lot of circumstantial evidence for the worst charge. With him, you had a criminal case with a direct chain of intent. Callie spent 4 hours with the folder. Then she opened her laptop and went back to the Astoria court filing she had found and started looking at what surrounded it. Who else was named in the case? Which attorneys were involved? What address had been used for service of process? By 2 in the afternoon, she had a current address in Astoria, a phone number linked to a utility account, and the name of the attorney who had represented McCready in the 2019 proceeding. She texted Decker, "I have McCready's current location and contact, confirmed as of last month via utility records. I need to be there when you approach him." His response came in 90 seconds. "How? I can explain the methodology later, yes or no." A longer pause. Then, "Let me make a call." She made herself eat something while she waited. Crackers, cheese, a bowl of the leftover rice. She had not been eating enough this week, and she knew it, and she was practical enough to address the problem rather than think about it. She ate standing at the counter and looked out the window at the street below, at the ordinary Sunday afternoon of her neighborhood. Someone walking a dog, 2 kids on bikes, an older man sitting on his stoop reading a paperback, and felt the particular clarity that comes when you have been operating in fog for a long time and something has suddenly given you a bearing. Her phone rang. Not Decker, an unknown number which she might not have answered except that the first 2 digits matched the area code of the unknown number that had sent her the diner coordinates. She picked up. Callie Mercer. The voice was older male, the specific gravel of a man who had smoked for decades and stopped. And the stopped hadn't entirely undone the smoking. She recognized it even so, or recognized the shape of it, the cadence, the way it moved in her name, like a hand on a familiar door handle. She sat down. She had not decided to sit down. Her knees had made the decision. "Hi, Dad," she said. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. Then, "Hi, Cal." She breathed in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. She was crying, she discovered, not dramatically, not with any of the theatrical apparatus she associated with crying in her mind, just quietly, the way rain sometimes falls in October without announcement. "I found your note," she said. "I figured." "I've been angry at you," she said, "for 8 years, for not—" She stopped, started again. "I know now that it wasn't. I know it was more complicated than it looked. But I've been angry." "I know," he said. "That's fair, Callie. That's completely fair." "I'm not done being angry." "That's fair, too." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Decker says you ask about me every week." "Every week," he confirmed. "Ruiz brings me the update, how the studio is going, whether you're eating enough." A pause. "You're not eating enough, from what Ruiz says." She laughed a sound that surprised her, short and rough and real. "Tell Ruiz I'm eating fine." "I'll tell him. He won't believe me." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm not ready to see you yet. I need to finish this first." "I know," he said. "Decker told me. You're going to go after Trent." It wasn't disapproval in his voice. It was something more like recognition. "I'm going to finish it," she said. "Is that okay with you?" "Callie." His voice had in it the enormous thing she had seen in his face in the photograph, the careful and fierce thing. "I stopped telling you what to do when you were about 12, and you started winning arguments with me. You know that." "Good," she said. "Be careful," he said. And then, before she could respond, "I love you. I'm sorry I missed 8 years. I'm going to spend whatever we have left making up for it." She looked out the window at the Sunday afternoon street. "We'll talk more," she said. "After." "After," he agreed. She hung up. She sat for a few minutes with the phone on the table in front of her and let the room be exactly what it was. Ordinary quiet, full of the sound of the street below. Then she pulled herself together, which she was very good at, and opened the text thread with Decker. Yes, he had written while she was on the phone. "You come." Chapter President agreed. "We go Wednesday." She started to type a response, then stopped, because something was wrong. She read the text again. Chapter President agreed. She had never told Decker that she'd spoken with Ruiz, beyond confirming the meeting. She had never told him specifically that she'd refused Ruiz's offer of help, that she'd said she needed time. But Decker's text had the specific rhythm of someone who had already had a conversation about her, who was reporting the outcome of a discussion she hadn't been part of. She went back through the logic of it. Decker had been placed at Voss Inc. to watch her. Decker had known her name before she entered the studio. Decker had known Ruiz was going to contact her before Ruiz did it. Decker had at every step been several information moves ahead of her, which was she had been telling herself, because he had access to the chapter's full intelligence. But she opened her messages and scrolled back to the very first morning he'd come to her studio. She had asked him how he knew her name, and he'd said, "Sound carries." And then 2 days later had admitted that wasn't true, that he had already known her name. But when she'd pressed him on how he'd said, "Not yet," not yet, that was a deferral, not a boundary. A deferral is what you do when you're managing the timing of a revelation, when you know the answer and you're choosing when to deliver it. She pulled out the accordion folder and found the section on the chapter's Search for Hank Mercer's Daughter. It was thin, 2 pages, chronological. Searches attempted over the years, addresses tracked, trails gone cold. She read through it twice. Then she found at the bottom of the second page an addendum in different handwriting than the rest of the file. Contact established via Voss Inc. appointment system. Confirmed identity via available records prior to appointment. Proceeding per established protocol. The note was dated 4 months ago, not 6 weeks. 4 months. She read it 3 more times. Then she set the folder down. Decker had known who she was for 4 months. Not 6 weeks. 4 months. He had let her believe it was 6 weeks because 6 weeks sounded like recent surveillance. And 4 months sounded like something longer, something more deliberate, something that had begun and continued while she was going about her ordinary life entirely unaware. She sat with that knowledge for exactly long enough to understand the full shape of it. Then she stood up, put on her jacket and her boots, and walked 6 blocks to Decker's apartment, which she knew the address of because it was in the contact sheet Ruiz had left with a folder, and knocked on his door. He answered in 30 seconds. He was in a t-shirt and jeans and no shoes, and he had clearly not been expecting anyone because his guard was down in a way she hadn't seen. Before he looked for a moment, before he could rearrange himself like an ordinary person at home on a Sunday afternoon, and then the rearrangement happened, and the familiar, careful quality was back. "The addendum," she said instead of hello. 4 months, not 6 weeks. He was very still. "When were you going to tell me?" she said. "Callie." "When?" Not loud, very clear. He stepped back from the door. She came in. His apartment was what she would have predicted. Ordered, functional. A few things on the walls that suggested genuine taste rather than decoration. A half-eaten bowl of something on the kitchen counter. A book open face down on the couch arm, the spine creased from actual reading rather than display. He turned to face her. He had the look of a man who has been waiting for a specific conversation and is now in it, and has not, despite the waiting, fully prepared for how it feels. "I was going to tell you when we had Macready," he said. "When it was over." when you had the full context and the thing that mattered most was already resolved. "That's not your decision to make," she said. "I know. You let me operate for 4 months in a situation where I didn't know I was being watched, where I thought the surveillance was recent and tactical, where I thought Decker. I trusted the timeline you gave me." And the timeline was a managed version of the truth. "Yes," he said. No qualifier. No but. "Why?" She sat down, uninvited, on the arm of his couch. "Specifically, not the mission logic. I understand the mission logic. Why you, specifically?" He looked at her for a long moment. He was having some internal negotiation. She could see it in his face, the same kind she recognized from her own face in mirrors in difficult moments. Then he said, "Because by the time you walked into that studio, I already knew enough about you to know that if I told you first thing that I knew who you were, that the chapter sent me that your father was alive, you would have run. Not because you're a coward, because you have spent 8 years building a life that belongs entirely to you. And the moment someone tells you there's a whole apparatus around you that you didn't build and didn't choose, the instinct is to protect what's yours by removing it from the equation." He paused. "I wasn't willing to watch you disappear. Not for mission reasons, because by 6 weeks in, let alone 4 months in, I wasn't watching you for the chapter anymore. I was watching because I didn't want to stop." The room was quiet. On the street below, a truck, a delivery van, went past with enough noise to fill the silence briefly, and then let it back in. "That's a better answer than I expected," Callie said. "It's the true answer," he said, "for what that's worth given the context." "It's worth something," she said. "I don't know yet exactly how much." His phone rang. He glanced at it, and something in his expression changed. Not alarm, but urgency. He picked up, listened for 4 seconds, and said, "When?" Listened again, said, "How sure?" And then his face went to a different quality of, still the kind that meant something large and immediate. He lowered the phone. "Callie," he said, "I need you to stay here." "What happened?" "Someone—" He stopped, restarted. "Trent Voss has a contact at the Portland Press-Examiner. Someone tipped him that you've been in contact with the investigative desk there. He knows you have a file. He's moving fast." The investigative desk. She had reached out 2 days ago through an email she thought was carefully routed to the Examiner's lead investigative reporter, a woman named Jess Nakamura, who covered financial fraud in the Pacific Northwest, and whose byline Callie had read while building the Mercer folder, and thought she would understand this. She had sent a preliminary inquiry, not the documents themselves, but enough to establish contact and suggest there was a story. Apparently that had been enough for Trent Voss's network. "How fast?" she asked. "He's dispatched someone tonight. We don't know where you are right now, which buys some time, but your apartment and the studio are both—" He stopped again. He was doing the thing she did, processing faster than speech. "How much of the file can you get to tonight?" "I have digital copies of everything," she said. "Encrypted off-site backup. I set it up the first week." Something moved in his face, that quality adjacent to admiration. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's okay." He was on the phone again. "She's with me. The documents are backed up off-site. We need— Yes. Now." "How long?" A pause. Tell him now." He hung up. He looked at her. "The chapter is moving," he said. "All of them. Tonight." She looked at him and understood from his face that the shape of the next hours had already been determined, not by her, not by Trent, but by 300 men who had been waiting for exactly this moment, who had been holding the line for 8 years, and who were apparently done waiting. "I need my laptop," she said. "Your laptop is in your studio." "Then we need to go to my studio." He grabbed his jacket. She was already at the door, and then, before she turned the handle, she stopped. Because on the kitchen counter, next to the half-eaten bowl, was Decker's phone, face up, and on the screen, still lit from the call, she could see the contact name. Prez. Chapter. That wasn't the thing that stopped her. The contact name confirmed what she already knew. What stopped her was the last text in the thread visible on the preview. A message Decker had sent while she was in his apartment, while she was looking at the accordion folder. She figured it out. Both timelines. She's handling it better than I deserved. She looked at the phone. She looked at him. He was watching her with the particular quality of a man who knows he has been seen completely and is waiting to find out what that means. "You told them I was handling it well," she said. "You are," he said. "I'm furious with you." "I know." "I'm going to stay furious with you for a specific amount of time." "That's fair." "After which," she said, "we're going to have a much longer conversation about what 4 months of watching someone looks like and what it means and what we do about it." "I'll be there for that conversation," he said. "All of it." She opened the door. "Studio," she said. "Now." They went. The studio was dark when they got there, which was as it should have been at 9 on a Sunday night, and it was intact, which was more than Callie had expected. She unlocked the door, went straight to her desk, and pulled up the cloud backup on her phone. First, confirmed it was current, last sync 40 minutes ago, all files present, and then opened her laptop and brought up the encrypted folder she had built over the past weeks. She'd used a service that sharded the data across 3 separate servers in different geographic regions. Not hacker-proof, but proof enough against someone trying to remotely access or delete it on short notice. Decker stood near the door phone to his ear, speaking in a low voice to someone on the chapter side. She could hear enough to understand the coordinates of the conversation. "She's at the studio." "Yes, both exits confirmed." "How many are already moving?" And she let the operational texture of it wash past her while she focused on the file. She sent the encrypted folder link to Jess Nakamura at the Portland Press-Examiner with a message that was 3 sentences. "This is the file I referenced. Everything is time-stamped and cross-referenced. I'll be available by phone by midnight." Then she forwarded the same link to 2 other addresses, her personal backup email and Mara's, with a note. "Don't open this unless I tell you to, or you don't hear from me in 24 hours. "Done?" Decker asked. "Phone now, down." "Done." She closed the laptop. "What's the timeline?" "The chapter expects Trent's guy at your apartment. First, it's the most obvious location. When they don't find you there, they'll check the studio. We have maybe 40 minutes before someone shows up here." He paused. "The chapter is already in the city, multiple locations." "How many?" "Tonight?" He looked at her steadily. "About 300. She had known the number intellectually, had heard Ruiz say it, had processed it as information. Hearing it from Decker in the specific context of tonight, here, moving right now, was a different experience. The way knowing a storm is coming is different from hearing the first wind. "What do they intend to do?" she asked. "Not violence," he said, "if that's what you're asking." "I know, it's not violence." She had grown up around the chapter's particular discipline, the ironclad lines that the president drew between presence and aggression. Her father had drawn those same lines. "I'm asking what?" Specifically, they're going to make themselves visible, he said, at every point of egress from the city center, at the building where the examiner's offices are, at the courthouse, at every location that Trent Voss might try to use to shut this down or exert pressure. They're not going to interfere with anything. They're going to make it very clear that a very large number of people are aware of what's happening tonight. A pause. And they're going to be here at this studio in about 8 minutes. She absorbed this. Then she said, "He's going to come himself." "Who?" "Trent." She was already thinking through it. "He's not the kind of man to send someone else for the final move. He went to my appointment personally. He filed the business complaint personally. If he thinks I'm here with the file..." She stopped. "If he thinks you're here with the file, and it's the last window he has to stop it from going out," Decker finished, "then he comes himself." She looked at the door. "How much time do we have before your people get here?" 8 minutes, maybe less. That might be enough. She reached under the desk, pulled out the drawer where she kept her phone charger and paper clips, and the small items of a working life, and found, all the way at the back, the voice recorder she'd bought after the first week of fake reviews. Small, discreet, the kind you used for interviews or meetings where you wanted to be sure of the record. She had charged it twice without using it, and then almost forgotten it was there. She turned it on. She put it in her jacket pocket. Decker looked at her. "Callie, I'm not putting myself in danger," she said. "I'm documenting." "You're setting yourself up as bait." "I'm being present for a confrontation that is going to happen regardless," she said. "The only question is whether I'm in it or I'm not. And I've made 8 years of decisions based on being outside things for my own protection. And I'm done." She met his eyes. "I'm done standing outside Decker." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, "Stay by the door. If it escalates, you get out. Non-negotiable." "Negotiable," she said, "but I'll consider it." The sound came first. A vehicle outside, headlights moving across the front window, then footsteps, more than one set, then a knock which surprised her. She'd expected the door to open without that preliminary courtesy. But Trent Voss had manners, or their performative equivalent, even now. She went to the door and opened it. Trent Voss was in a dark wool coat, the same pressed quality she remembered from the tattoo studio. His silver temples and his architectural face, arranged in the expression she now recognized as his default register, prepared, controlled the smile present in the structural sense of a load-bearing feature. Behind him, slightly to his left, was a man in a gray jacket who had the specific physical composition of a person paid to be physically present. "Miss Calloway," Trent said. Her studio name. "I'm glad I caught you. I was hoping we could talk." "You broke into my studio," she said, a small pause. "That's a serious allegation." "It is," she agreed. "I have a police report." She stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. The man in the gray jacket started to follow, and Decker moved, not aggressively, simply into the space the man was stepping toward, filling it in the way that walls fill spaces. The man in the gray jacket stopped. Trent looked at Decker with an expression that said he had expected to find her alone and had not recalculated quickly enough. "You can leave your associate outside," Callie said. "This is a conversation." Trent looked at her for a moment, reassessing. Then he made a small gesture, and the man in the gray jacket went back outside. Decker closed the door. Trent stood in the center of Callie's studio and looked around at the space, the new monitors she had bought with the insurance payout, the rebuilt portfolio boards, the coffee mug on the windowsill, with the lavender listing slightly left. And his expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. "You've been in contact with the examiner," he said. "I have." "I'd encourage you to reconsider that," he said. "Whatever you think you have, it's not what you think it is. Your father was not Hank Mercer, was not a simple man. The business arrangements he made were complicated, and the documentation is—" "The notary was suspended for document irregularities," Callie said. "R. McCready, whose current address in Astoria I have." She kept her voice completely even. The recorder in her pocket was running. "The 2019 court filing that lists him as a witness establishes that he was in Eastern Oregon during the period when the Bend property was transferred. The transfer documents use his seal on a date when his license was already under review." Trent was quiet. "You've had 8 years to clean up the trail," she said. "You didn't find McCready, did you? You couldn't get to him because you didn't know where he was." "I don't know what you think you're doing," Trent said, and the smile was gone now. Not dramatically, just no longer structurally necessary. "I'm finishing a conversation," she said. "The one you started when you put me in that chair and performed in front of your clients. That was nothing personal." "You recognized me," she said. "Not for certain. I'd changed enough that you weren't sure. But the eagle design, the number in the design." She had understood this only in the past 2 days, going back through her own original sketch. The number in the eagle's talons, a detail she'd put in because she remembered it from a pin on her father's vest that she'd loved as a child, that had lived in her muscle memory without her ever consciously deciding to draw it. "You saw the number, and you needed to know if I knew what it meant. So you pushed, and you watched my face. And She stopped for one moment. "I didn't react the way you expected. I didn't know what it meant. You weren't sure." "This is a creative reconstruction," Trent said, but his voice was lower. "And then Decker stepped in and cut your test short," she continued. "So you escalated the social media campaign, the business complaint, the photographs, to establish that you knew who I was. That was probing, looking for a reaction that would tell you how much I knew." She looked at him steadily. "You didn't need to destroy me. You needed to know if I was a threat. And you didn't get a clear enough answer, so you had my studio broken into to send a message that would make me contact someone. And whoever I contacted would tell you what I had." Trent looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to something that felt closer to its actual register. Less performance, more material. "Your father was not a victim," he said. "He made choices that put him in a dangerous position." "He made choices," she agreed. "And you used them to take everything he'd built and put your name on it, and then try to make sure he couldn't come back to contest that." She took a step toward him, not aggressive, just removing the distance he'd been maintaining. "Here's what's going to happen. The file at the Examiner is going out tonight. Jess Nakamura has it now. The backup is in 3 locations you cannot access. McCready's address is known to the chapter, who will approach him tomorrow morning legally, with representation present, which is how they've been doing every step of this." She paused. "You can contest it. You have resources, and you have lawyers, and you have 8 years of building a narrative. But the chain of the document fraud is clean and documented, and the notary is findable. The question is how you want the next part to go." Trent stared at her. He had the look of a man running calculations at speed, the same quality of controlled assessment she had watched him use in the tattoo studio, but without the advantage of being in his own space, without the social architecture he'd set up to make himself large and her small. "You think I'm going to walk out of here and accept this?" he said. "I think you're going to walk out of here," she said, "because the alternative is a confrontation in my studio on a Sunday night with a voice recorder running in my jacket pocket, which your attorney would strongly advise against." His eyes went to her jacket pocket. She watched him calculate. "The other alternative," Decker said from his position by the door, quietly, without moving, "is to walk out and look at the street." Trent Voss looked at Decker. Then he moved to the front window and looked out. Division Street, on a Sunday night in October, was not, as a rule, a busy street. Tonight, it was not quiet. In both directions, as far as the amber pools of the streetlights extended, motorcycles were parked, not moving, not revving, simply present, with their riders standing beside them or sitting on them, 3 abreast in some places, a continuous line of them stretching down the block in both directions. The man in the gray jacket who had come with Trent was standing on the sidewalk, looking at the line of bikes, with the expression of a man who has significantly recalculated his evening. The street was not blocked. Traffic could still pass. Nobody was doing anything technically actionable. They were simply standing in the cold October air of Portland at 9:45 on a Sunday night, in very large numbers, very visibly watching a studio door. "Who are they?" Trent asked, and his voice had something in it that she would have identified in anyone else as the first admission of something she had not expected from him: fear. "They're my father's people," Callie said. "They're my people." And the word "my," the specific, claimed unqualified ownership of it, felt like something she had not said in a very long time, and had not known she was missing until she heard herself say it. Trent Voss looked at the street for a long time. Then he turned. His expression had done something she had not seen it do in any of their interactions. It had become small. Not dramatic, not crumbling, just compressed, as if the architecture of his face had adjusted to a lower ceiling. "My attorneys," he started. "Your attorneys will receive the relevant filings through the appropriate channels," Callie said. "That's how this works now." She moved back to the door, opened it. "Good night, Trent." He looked at her one more time. Something moved in his face, complicated human, the kind of thing that makes it difficult to reduce even a person who has done serious harm to a simple category. Then he walked out. She closed the door behind him and stood with her back against it and breathed. "You okay?" Decker asked from exactly where he'd been the whole time. "Yes." She pulled the recorder from her pocket and stopped it, and that's the conversation. 45 minutes later, Jess Nakamura called. She had gone through the preliminary file and had 3 questions, sharp, specific, in the mode of someone who already understood the structure and was confirming details rather than orienting herself. Callie answered all 3 clearly and precisely, and then said, "There's one thing the file doesn't have yet. R. McCready, the notary. He's in Astoria. The chapter is approaching him tomorrow. Can you connect me with the chapter representative who makes that approach?" "I can ask," Callie said. "It's their decision." "Fair enough." A pause. "This is a strong file, Ms. Calloway. We're going to need a few days to independently verify, but I don't see any reason this doesn't go." "Thank you," Callie said. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's in print." She hung up. She was sitting on the edge of her desk, and Decker was standing near the window, and outside the chapter was still present on Division Street. Fewer of them now, but still there. The sound of their presence, a low, continuous thing below the ordinary night sounds of the city. She looked at Decker. He was looking at her with the quality she had been interpreting as careful patience for weeks, and she understood now that it had that quality because it was careful, deliberate, the patience of a person who has been paying attention with the full weight of himself and is trying not to cost the other person anything with the visibility of that. "I'm still angry about the 4 months," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to be clear that being angry about it and understanding why you did it are things that can coexist." "They can," he agreed. "I'm going to need—" She stopped. This was the part she had been approaching all evening, the part that the careful, practical architecture of the evening had been building toward, not in a calculated way, but in the way that real things accumulate one after another until you are standing in front of them. "I'm going to need people going forward. I've been operating like I don't need people for 8 years, and that's worked structurally. But it's not. It's not the full structure." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone started a motorcycle and let it run for a second, and then turned it off, the sound like a punctuation mark. "Your father wants to see you," he said. "Whenever you're ready." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I'm going to call him tomorrow." "Okay." "And I'm going to be at the McCready approach," she said. "I want Ruiz to know that." "He already does," Decker said. "He figured you'd want to be there." She almost smiled. "Ruiz knows me better than I realized." "He's known you since you were 8, Decker said. "He's had time to learn." She stood up from the desk edge. She was tired, the specific, textured tiredness of a day that has required you to be fully present in each moment of it, which is a different kind of tired than the tiredness of a day spent going through motions. She was tired, and she was underneath the tiredness something that she was having trouble naming precisely. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter and more structural than either. Like a room that has been rearranged and is finally in the configuration it was always meant to be in. She moved toward the door, intending to go home, and she passed close to him in the narrow studio, and he said, "Hey." "Quiet." She stopped. "I know the timing is terrible," he said, "and I know I don't have a lot of credibility right now on the subject of what I want, given the 4 months thing. But I need to say it, because I'm a person who has been doing too much managing of information, and not enough—" He paused. "I have not been in your studio 6 times in 2 weeks because of a mission, Callie. That's over. If it was ever true, it stopped being true quickly. And I should have told you that, instead of filing it under mission logistics." She looked at him. In the light of the studio, the overhead fluorescence, she kept at 2/3 brightness, because full brightness hurt her eyes after a long day. He looked like himself, which was not a trivial observation. She'd spent weeks watching him perform a version of himself and wondering where the line was. And standing here, in her broken and repaired studio, with a voice recorder in her pocket and a coffee mug of lavender on the windowsill, he looked like the line had been resolved. "The coffee," she said. "What?" "That first morning. The black coffee, no sugar. That's when you know how someone takes their coffee. It means you've been paying attention." She looked at him steadily. "How long had you been paying attention?" "About 4 months," he said. And the honesty of it, the same timeline, the same admission, but offered voluntarily now, with nothing strategic behind it, landed differently than the same fact had an hour ago. 4 months, she said. "Yes." "And you still got it right. Black, no sugar." "I pay very close attention," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not the managed patience quality, something that had less cover on it, something that she recognized because she felt the same thing in herself, the particular exposure of a person who is allowing someone else to see the full extent of what they feel. She put her hand on his arm, not a dramatic gesture. She was not in general a person for dramatic gestures.
just her hand on his forearm through the canvas jacket, brief and specific. He went very still, the way he went still when something mattered, and she felt the stillness all the way from his arm to the floor. "We're going to go very slowly with this," she said, "because I don't do trust quickly, and you have a specific deficit to work through. And I have 8 years of building things by myself that I'm not just going to hand over." "I know," he said. "But I'm not dismissing it," she said. "What you said, I'm not dismissing it." He looked at her. "Okay," he said, and the word meant more than its 2 letters. She removed her hand. She picked up her jacket. She went to the door and opened it onto Division Street, where the October cold came in with the smell of exhaust and the last of the autumn from the trees on the median, and where the remaining bikes and their riders made a quiet, solid presence in the amber streetlight. One of the riders 3 spaces down was Ruiz. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone, or pretending to. But when she stepped out onto the sidewalk, he looked up, and she crossed the distance between them, and she put her arms around him, the way you embrace someone you have known since you were 8 years old, and have not held since you were 17. And every day since then has been a kind of distance that was never what you wanted. He put his arms around her back. He was solid and warm and smelled like motor oil and coffee and the specific outdoors smell she associated with the chapter open air and leather, and something ineffably, permanently familiar.
"I talked to him today,"
she said against his shoulder. "I know," Ruiz said. "He called me after. He cried." "He cried?" "A little," Ruiz said. "Don't tell him I told you." She laughed again, the same rough, real sound from earlier in the day. It felt both times like something being loosened that had been held too tightly for too long. She stepped back. She looked at Ruiz and then at the street, at the 300 people who had stood in the cold for her on a Sunday night without being asked to explain themselves, without requiring anything of her in return except her presence in the world, which she had been so certain was a thing she was guarding rather than a thing that was being guarded alongside her. "Thank you," she said to Ruiz, "for all of it, 8 years of it." "Your dad would have done the same for any of ours," Ruiz said simply. Which was true, which was the kind of truth that has no qualification. She looked down the street. The line of bikes went on further than she could clearly see in the amber light. Somewhere beyond the visible range of it, Portland was going about its Sunday night. The bars and the restaurants, and the late dog walkers, and the couples going home from movies. All of it continuing. The city did not know that something had shifted in its fabric tonight, that a line had been drawn and held, that a woman had stood in her own studio and finished something that had started 8 years before she was born to finish. She would go home. She would sleep, genuinely, she thought, for the first time in 2 weeks. Tomorrow she would call her father, and she would tell him she was ready, and eventually she would go and see him, and the conversation they had would be the hardest and most necessary conversation of her adult life, and she would have it. She would go with Ruiz and Decker to Astoria, and she would be present when R. McCready was approached, and she would watch the last link of the chain get put in place. She would return Jess Nakamura's follow-up calls, and she would answer every question accurately and completely. She would file the business documents that transferred the Oregon properties back into the estate with the appropriate legal representation. She would do all of this because she was Callie Mercer, and she was a person who documented things and met deadlines and kept commitments and didn't leave anything incomplete. But first, she stood on Division Street in the October cold and breathed and let herself be here
in the middle of it all, which was not outside it, and was not behind a wall of pride and careful distance, and the armored independence she had manufactured to survive. It was simply here, present. Her. 3 weeks later, the Portland Press Examiner published Jess Nakamura's piece. It ran in 2 parts. The first part covered the property fraud, the LLCs, the transfers, the suspended notary who had spoken to Jess directly in a recorded interview conducted with an attorney present. The second part covered the road accident, which was no longer being classified as an accident. R. McCready had provided the name D.F. in exchange for cooperation with the DA, and D.F. had turned out to be a freight contractor in Idaho who had his own reasons for not wanting the investigation to continue. Trent Voss's attorneys issued 3 statements in the first 48 hours after publication. None of them were effective. He was charged formally 6 weeks after that. On the day the charges were filed, Callie drove down to a facility in Medford where her father had been staying. A quiet place, private, staffed by people who knew not to ask questions. And she sat across from him at a table in a room with a window that looked out on a garden that was not particularly impressive, but was clearly tended with care. And she looked at him, and he looked at her, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Because 8 years of silence requires more than words to cross. Then he said, "You look like your mother." "Ruiz says I look like you," she said. "Around the eyes." "Ruiz is biased," her father said. "I'm objective." "You are the least objective person I've ever met," she said. He smiled. It was a lopsided smile, she noticed, that she had somehow not remembered, slightly more on the left side than the right, going all the way up. She had it too, she knew. She'd been told. They sat together in the quiet room, with a garden outside the window, and talked about many things, and some things not at all. Because some things needed more than one day, more than one room, more than the particular light of a November afternoon. But they were in the same room. That was the beginning. That was after 8 years of outside things and clean breaks and carefully maintained distance. The exact and sufficient beginning. 6 months after the night on Division Street, Callie added a second name to the studio door, Callie Mercer Design. She did it on a Tuesday morning with Mrs. Nguyen from next door, watching from the sidewalk with crossed arms, and the expression she made when she approved of something but did not intend to say so. Mara was there and cried and didn't apologize for it. Decker was there, standing near the back of the small crowd of studio warming attendees, holding his coffee in both hands, and when Callie stepped back and looked at the lettering on the glass, both names, both true, finally given, the same door, he caught her eye across the room, and she looked at him for exactly long enough to communicate something she did not yet have language for, that was warm and specific and entirely her own choosing. The lavender in the coffee mug on the windowsill had been repotted eventually into a proper clay pot. It grew crookedly, still listing left, but with determination. Callie had decided she liked this about it. Outside on the first Tuesday morning of April, Portland was doing what Portland does in April. Uncertain sky, the particular shimmer of light through new leaves, a smell in the air that was rain and coffee and the city waking up to itself after a long winter. The street was entirely ordinary. The bikes were gone. They didn't need to be there. That was the point of what they'd done, to make themselves necessary once, so that they wouldn't need to be necessary again. Some things, when done right, only need to happen once.